Austin Blackman. I'm the Chief of Environment, Energy, and Open Space. And it's my pleasure to be leading the team at the Environment Department that is in charge of Climate Ready Boston. We are here in the Fort Point neighborhood in South Boston at a particularly relevant time period following some huge storms that we've had over the past 2 months. And we wanted to share with you some of the efforts that we've done already in studying what we hope will become projects to protect this neighborhood. We've got a great team that's been assembled that's been not only studying the sea level rise projections, but then also doing engineering studies to try and help us understand what some conceptual projects would look like. They've also been trying to help us in terms of what we can do from a policy perspective to protect these neighborhoods as well. And so tonight, before we get into the open house component of the evening, we're going to have the team really walk through the analysis that they've done today. And then we've got the full team here, and Carly from Arcadis, who's been leading the South Boston team, will introduce that team and point anyone to the direction that they need to get for questions. We've got staff from the Environment Department, we've got staff from Boston Water and Sewer, we've got staff from the Boston Transportation Department. So regardless of what your question is, we have someone here tonight to answer it for you. So with no further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Carly, who's going to take you through the presentation.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody, and thank you, Austin. Thank you, everyone, for being here tonight. As Austin mentioned, this is really a short introductory presentation. We're trying to share with everyone the information we think that you need to kind of get you started working through the ports and meeting the team members and asking really detailed questions. Ask them the tough questions, right? If they don't know the answer, they'll refer you to somebody that maybe does, you know. But we've got multiple stations here tonight, 7 stations in addition to this short presentation. We've got some informational stations. The first one to provide you with an overview of the Climate Ready South Boston initiative and district flood risk. We've got Joe from Woods Hole Group, the company that has been developing the flood hazard data used by the Climate Ready Boston initiatives as well as Mass DOT, and he can answer any questions that you have about the data. We've also got 5 stations related to different areas within the South Boston district. This is a very unique waterfront community. Just about every sort of waterfront typology that you can imagine is within this district, and it's very fascinating. And so we've broken the community up based on sort of these different typologies, flood risk information, flood pathways, and the technical context and stakeholders with which we're working. The Fort Point Channel, South Boston Waterfront, Seaport Boulevard, Marine Industrial Park, and Reserved Channel together, and the South Boston neighborhood. And we'll talk about that more in detail a little bit later. So the objectives tonight are for us to share information with you, right? Share progress that we made since our last public meeting and the information that we've taken from stakeholders and from our technical analyses. But really, we're also very interested in your perspective. No one knows your neighborhood better than you do, right? And your general feedback, reactions to the sorts of options that we've developed based on technical analysis and stakeholder engagement to date is going to be extremely helpful to our process moving forward. I might have to go back over here. Oh, it goes... And this initiative actually builds on the backs of a lot of other work that the city has been doing. Imagine Boston 2030 was released in 2016, and the 4 main goals of that study really are integrated into the work that we're doing in Climate Ready South Boston, looking to improve the quality of life in the neighborhood, drive inclusive economic growth, promote a healthy environment, and of course adapt to climate change, and invest in infrastructure, open space, and culture. In 2016, kind of concurrent with the Imagine Boston 2030 report, we developed the Climate Ready Boston study, which really provided sort of the overall vision and roadmap for the city in terms of what additional work was going to be needed in order to fully understand the risk context within which we were working and the various strategies that were needed and the layered approaches that were needed in order to address the risk. So we're seeking here to generate resilient solutions for neighborhoods, infrastructure, and governance that help the region prosper and grow in the face of long-term climate change and short-term, right? Because this is not something that's coming, this is something that is here now, as evidenced by the number of folks here tonight, right? And those aren't the only two other initiatives that the city has been embarking on. We have the Climate Ready East Boston and Charlestown report was released just last fall. I encourage you to pick that up. The report that we're developing for Climate Ready South Boston is much of the same kind of format and function that you'll be seeing in that report. The Boston Harbor Barrier Study is ongoing. I know a lot of folks are anxious to see the results of that. That should be released late spring or early summer. And, of course, the University of Massachusetts Boston Finance and Governance Study. So really taking a deep dive into how we're going to get all of this very important work done. So our mission really is to develop layered flood control and integrated green infrastructure measures that mitigate the effects of climate change and create social, economic, and environmental benefits and value for the people of South Boston and to all who share in the health of this community. So we're roughly 3/4 of the way through this study. This is our second public open house, but there has been a tremendous amount of other engagement activities that have been going on. You can see that we began our study in September, a very rapid schedule, and the results of this is really a conceptual report. We're not fully designing options here. We're really thinking about what's feasible and what are we hearing from people in terms of what they want to see in this area so that we can pave the way for future action and detailed design, engineering, and construction, as well as, what are the different priority projects, when should they be implemented, and how. So just a little bit about South Boston and the neighborhood. During the Climate Ready Boston initiative, we found that this community really had the highest risk of any community in the city of Boston for a variety of reasons. And this image, I think, really, if you can see it, tells an important story. You can see that the current shoreline is very different from the historic shoreline in South Boston. There's a lot of fill, and fill, as you know, is not natural landscape, and it's generally at a much lower elevation than the original coastline. When you look at the flood projection maps, you can see that most of the area that we're looking at as being heavily exposed to flooding is area that was filled. This image, and you will see these same maps over here, and Joe can answer detailed questions for you, but this image really displays 3 different sea level rise scenarios and the same kind of event in each sea level rise scenario. So what people commonly call the 100-year storm, also the 1% annual chance event. It's the event that has a 1% probability of being met or exceeded in any given year. This image tells you how that event is expected to change over time. So if you look at this dark blue area, you can see this is the current 1% annual chance flood event. With 9 to 12 inches of sea level rise, we have this sort of more aquamarine blue, and you start to see that the flood risk really dramatically increases with that sea level rise. And then with 36 inches of sea level rise, we're really looking at the entire South Boston waterfront being subject to that storm event, potentially. What is also really important for you to learn from this image is that the South Boston neighborhood, if it remains unmitigated against flood risk, provides a flood pathway to other parts of the city, exacerbating loss. So what you see here, and this was also presented during the first open house in December, this is essentially the technical toolkit of options that we're looking at. These are the kinds of things that we're thinking are most feasible to apply within the district. We have things like, and there's different flavors of each of these, a vertical seawall, watertight buildings and structures, a raised harbor walk or park space, constructed ground, and transportation or navigation types of solutions. These are sort of the engineering kind of toolkit that we're looking at, but this has nothing to do with the design, right? So this is what some would call the skeleton behind the actual experience that you might be having with the flood protection elements. So this is just kind of the things that we've been thinking about. And these are some of the ways that these things actually look like when they are applied. So raised harbor walk or park space, you can see that your relationship with the waterfront doesn't necessarily have to be curtailed when these projects are implemented. It can actually be enhanced. And these projects can actually use risk and leverage it into opportunity and to increase and improve quality of life in the area. I'm just terrible at this, this button thing. And then this is an example of what using constructed ground might look like. You'll find some areas as you move through the different stations in South Boston are very space constrained. And so in some cases we're contemplating, okay, what would it look like if we did move out into the harbor a little bit in order to erect some flood protection system? And then of course amenities. And today, you'll see some flavors of amenities that we're thinking about, but that really is something that will evolve over time through future engagement, design efforts, and future engineering as we move from conceptual phase to true design. Now, through engagement, we have asked folks a lot of questions about what's important to you. What's important to you in this neighborhood? How should we prioritize options? What are some of the things that we should really be thinking about as we prioritize them? And we, at the very beginning of the project in September, we released a survey that was issued from September all the way through December 31st. And we had 340 respondents to that survey. And those folks, the majority of them residents of South Boston, provided us this prioritization process. And we also asked the same question at the first open house and received this feedback as well. And so the top 7 criteria in order were effectiveness. So how much damage are we going to be potentially preventing here? Are we preventing additional pathways? Are we ensuring that any properties that could be damaged in this area are included within the alignment of the flood protection system? Environmental impact. Is air or water quality negatively affected or positively affected as a result of this project? Design life and adaptability. So one of the things that's really important to think about when we're planning these projects is how can they be adapted over time to accommodate higher levels of sea level rise, right? Because we are expecting potentially, we're on track right now to expect around 5 feet of sea level rise by the end of the century. Right now, the track that we're on in terms of sea level rise has us at 9 inches to a foot of sea level rise in 2030 to 2040. Feasibility, so how easy is it going to be to actually implement related to permitting, constructability. Equity, is there anybody negatively impacted as a result of this project? Social impact, what recreational and aesthetic benefits arise as a result of the project, and value creation. So how much is quality of life improved in this area, and does it increase the desirability of the area? So as you walk around, you'll see that if there's one bubble, it represents highly undesirable, desirable or least favored impact. And I'm going to start moving quickly. I realize I'm taking a lot of time here. And the more bubbles there are, the more desirable or more favored, or how the degree to which the option aligns with what you've told us is important. So other engagement efforts in addition to these open houses, we've had geographic focus groups working with tenants and property owners within each of these areas. We've had a lot of one-on-one interviews and small group meetings. The city has been tabling and participating in events. And then, of course, I mentioned the open house a little bit earlier. Some of the common themes that we've been hearing from you all is that both effectiveness and experience of any of these improvements are very, very important. So any of the options that are being considered really look at both of these things to the maximum extent as we can right now. That you want to continue the conversation, right? It's more engagement. We need more people at the table, and we hear you on that. And so we've been accommodating those needs as well.
there is a realization that collective action is needed. So as you look at these flood risk maps, you will notice that, you know, if my neighbor does not protect their property, but I protect my property, that water is going to go through their property and come back around and hit mine unless I've got my entire area circled, right? So it's a lot more cost effective to funnel those resources together for a district level strategy. We're hearing that fairness is needed in any funding strategies, so to consider what else people are spending their money on related to the city, and to honor and retain existing uses and business activities. Don't leave anybody out. So the stations, as I mentioned before, the Fort Point channel is Station 3. We've got Rob Adams from Halverson Design Partnership over there, and Rich McGinnis from the city with the BPDA is going to be there answering any questions that you have. We've got Chris Bush with BPDA and Edgar Westerhoff with Arcadis at the South Boston Waterfront Port. And who do we have at the Seaport Boulevard? Carl Spector with the City of Boston and Brett McMahon with Arcadis over at the Seaport Boulevard.
Kate Edwards and Lyndon DeSalvo.
Thank you. Kate Edwards and Lyndon DeSalvo are at the
Marine Industrial Park and Reserve Channel.
All right. And then South Boston neighborhood, we've got Bob Bulig in the back. You've got Barbara Landau with Noble, Wickersham, and Hart over here at Port 1.
With Allison from the city.
With Allison with the city. And then we've also got Joe with Woods Hole Group over with the flood risk maps, and Lauren Zingarelli with the city. So lots of people here. You've also got representatives from BWSC, as Austin mentioned a little bit earlier. So we encourage you, and I'm Carly Foster, as I mentioned before, the project manager on the consultant side. Here's your room layout. Can you all see it? And so at each one of these ports, you're going to see these today posters, right? And so this is kind of what the area looks like today. We've got some pictures to sort of orient you. Also orient you with which property is currently publicly owned or privately owned, and it summarizes feedback we've received to date. Now, these are the options posters that we're really looking for your feedback on. They're representing longer-term resilience goals for the area, and they might integrate more complex, challenging, or resource-intensive than near-term options. But we are looking for your feedback on whether or not we got it right on the evaluation criteria, and feel free to ask any questions you want about how that was developed, and let us know whether you like the option, whether you don't like the option, and write your feedback, also your thinking about the options. And then we have what we're calling these near-term options. These are the things that we anticipate being developed first, focused on first, in order to provide the most bang for the buck, reduce the most flood risk right now. And so we're looking for the exact same feedback on those early action options, and those are denoted with orange. And you will see those both in the Fort Point Channel area and along Seaport Boulevard. So after this open house tonight, we're going to integrate your feedback into the options, the recommendations, and the report, which we're expecting to release in May. We have a policy and implementation focus group on March 21st. So thanks, everybody.